back to Adversity to Ascension, a podcast about taking the adversity in your life and turning it into meaning. Today, I'm thrilled to have Sarah Parlow, someone who's become a good friend of mine, on the show to tell her inspiring story. Sarah is an LA-based nurse anesthetist, actress, writer, and LGBTQ advocate with a passion for personal growth and evolution. In the last year, she earned certification as a life coach and hypnotist and founded Aligned with Sarah, a coaching service designed to help others have breakthrough in their own lives. Her personal philosophy is that when people are authentic and aligned with their highest values, everything in their lives improves exponentially. Sarah credits alignment and authenticity to her own success in life, going as far back as 1995 when she transitioned as a teen to overcome a lifetime of gender dysphoria. For the past decade, she's been open about her story in order to educate the public about what it means to be trans. When she's not out changing hearts and minds, Sarah likes to cook, do Pilates, spend time with friends, and take bike tours around the world. So welcome, Sarah. It's so nice to see you.
Dr. Cox, thank you so much for having me on. It's such a pleasure.
Oh, my pleasure. All our honor. So, Sarah, I've known you for a little while now.
Yeah.
And you've been an important person in my life and the life of my daughter.
Yeah.
And I just am so inspired by your story because we live in a day and age where trans rights and trans existence is even in question in our political landscape. Mm-hmm. And you have been through so much and you've overcome so much. And I would love for you to tell the audience your story and how you got to where you are today.
Thank you so much for that. And it's such an honor to really show up and be present. And it is through sharing stories that we can actually touch on humanity of these stories and really, I think, build connection and understanding. I think the biggest obstacle that so many of us in the trans community face is just knowledge deficit. And we're up against so many of the public assumptions and the tropes that sort of haunt us. So I do hope to set the record straight. I can only speak for myself and my story and what I know to be true about my community. But I'll start by saying that just like everybody, I was born a baby because we are all born babies. None of us are born men or women. We are born babies. And I was assigned male at birth, according to the appearance of my body at birth. And despite this, I grew up to understand myself as a young child of like 4 or 5 years old to operate within the realm of femininity. Operating that way was intrinsic. It wasn't something that was taught to or pushed on me. Yes. It was just something that felt like the most natural thing in the world. And I quickly realized that no matter what anyone said or did, this was just my innate makeup. And right. So a lot of people question for trans people, what does it mean to feel like a woman or to feel like a female? And so what I can do really quick is just to break it down into a few qualities that I knew to be true about myself. And that was that I was very relational. To me, it was about relating with others. It was about bringing that feminine energy. And I think certainly anyone can be relational in this world, but women are more inclined, yes. I think. The other aspects where I was a creative child, creativity isn't exclusively a feminine quality, but creativity tends to be feminine in quality as yes. a force.
Yes.
And then the other thing I would say that I felt very early on was a very maternal feeling inside, this sort of nurturing, giving, caregiving aspect. And so what I found is I was so much more in alignment with the females in my life and with the feminine. And that was how I was most powerful because if we think of gender, it is the interface with
Yes.
which we interact with the world through a lens of masculine or feminine, or maybe in between. And my interface was then and continues to be today highest through the feminine.
That's really a characterization in my mind of the trans experience. And as you know, I have a trans daughter, and when she came out to me at the age of 16, it was not surprising to me at all. Mm-hmm. She thought it would be. That was the funny thing. But, I watched her from the time she was 3 years old, really identifying with her feminine side and wanting to be like the Disney princesses on the Disney movies that she watched, and just she aligned more with her little girl classmates in preschool and all through school. And so it is something that is actually born into a person. So it's not, would you say anyone would just wake up one day and choose to change their gender?
I think the process speaks for itself, or it self-eliminates people who really are not invested. Because, yes, as you know, you're going against everything that society wants you to be. You're given this cluster of qualities you're supposed to be based upon the gender assigned at birth. And so to go against that is no small undertaking, and it requires constant commitment. I think in general, anyone who is not truly trans, I could never say like someone might not slip by based upon, bad advice or bad practices. But in general, especially back when I transitioned in 95, there were certain standards, like we had to live in the gender we identified with for at least a year to 2 years to even access what we call today gender affirming care. So there were sort of these barriers we had to overcome. We had to really show our commitment. Mm-hmm. And look, it's still no walk in the park today. We're seeing this incredible resurgence of anti-trans sentiment to a level that I've never really witnessed in my lifetime. It's scary, but also what I find on the sort of metaphysical plane about laws of opposition is that in general, things that people resist persist. So yes, in essence, all of this backlash is just making us and my community stronger, ultimately, but it doesn't feel great right now.
Right. I can imagine that it is causing, as I think it is with many people who are concerned about the current anti-trans and anti-woman, anti-abortion, all of those trends that are happening now, that it's causing all of us to form connections and networks that are very extensive, so that we can come together and share support and share resources.
Yeah. And what's interesting is there is so much overlap. When we look at marginalized communities, I mean, that's a really broad pool of people. It can be LGBT. It could be people of color. It certainly is women, especially right now in our country. We're seeing this sort of rolling back of rights. And I will caution all of your listeners that the reason why people need to support the trans community is because our freedom is your freedom. They always go after bodily autonomy first.
Yes.
And to so many people, even though it's not the intention of trans people in general, we truly represent self-determination and freedom. And when you start to take away those things and police gender and how people need to be in the world, it doesn't just affect me. It affects every woman who's in the bathroom, who's getting policed about her appearance and whether she is woman enough to be there.
Right. What has it been like for you? What sort of stigma have you had to deal with and overcome in your professional and personal life?
Yeah, I would say on a personal level, I grew up in a conservative Catholic family. And just to give you a little insight, like everybody in my family, for the most part, is white, married, Christian with kids. So, there's not a lot of diversity or not that's spoken out loud. So I think I came in like a bit of a bomb.
I bet.
Even though it wasn't my intention. And I think looking back, again, we go back to knowledge deficit. Even years later, I'm sort of surprised that my family just kind of misunderstands certain things. And also, I just want to touch really briefly on the issue of shame, and shame is this emotion which really has no great use in life. It is a emotion of disconnect. It's an emotion of keeping people small and shrinking. And I think this happens a lot in these very restrictive, especially religious backgrounds, that life can only be one way. And so it has been challenging to work through some of that, unpack some of that, because even to be trans in this world, especially right now, is to almost exist with some internalized transphobia, discontent, self-hatred, all those things. So unpacking that is an ongoing process personally. And then I would say, as far as professionally, for many years as a nurse anesthetist, it's a high pressure job. It takes a lot to be a CRNA. It's not easy.
Right.
There's a lot of responsibility. You need people. You need to work together as a team. My first job was in Austin, Texas. I worked there in Austin for 5 years and worked at multiple hospitals, surgery centers, in a very large anesthesia group. And it's human nature that if you tell one or two people, eventually everybody knows. And I didn't know how to navigate, like, being in a fishbowl we're talking with doctors, nurses, surgeons, staff in the ORs at all these places, maybe 1,000 people.
Oh, yeah.
So there were many times I had felt the need to be sort of what we call stealth, or to not identify as trans. And so people make the assumption that I'm, a cisgender female, woman assigned female at birth. In many ways, it was about safety and protection. And I just want to share that when it comes to being trans, the issue of disclosure involves two things. Whether or not to disclose is about access to privilege, which can mean ability to make an income, access to relationships. And then the other component is it's sometimes an issue of safety.
Yes.
Because we don't live in a perfect world. So I think I committed and I knew who I was and transitioned, in my late teens, which was early for back then. Certainly it's possible earlier right now. But I didn't have a roadmap of how to navigate these sort of nuanced waters, these social situations. And so it was a lot of like walking a bit of a tightrope at times. Well,
you left your home in, I believe it was Pennsylvania?
Yes.
And you moved to LA, is that correct?
I was actually in Las Vegas for many years in my 20s before I got my graduate degree in back in Pennsylvania, lived in Texas, and eventually ended up in LA in 2016. So circuitous, but yeah.
Yes. And so did you have any connection to a trans community that you could, find support with and help through?
Yeah, it's so interesting. The community exists everywhere. And it's like we just sort of somehow find each other. I don't know how it happens. And especially when I first came out in Pittsburgh, I was 18 years old and there was a transgender support group. And it was all word of mouth. There really wasn't much.
Right. There was no internet, right?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And so my keys to success in life have always been relationships and information sharing. And I think that's really, truly something I learned in the community. We knew what doctors to go to who would prescribe for us. We knew who to go to for surgeons, how to navigate the legal stuff. And we really had to communicate and information share and support each other.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah.
How do you think your experience navigating through all of that, and I'm sure there were times when you were fearful, when you felt probably alone.
Yeah.
How do you think that has shaped your work in the world today?
Yeah, great question. I think you can never impart wisdom unless you've really lived it yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I think there is so much internal reflection that happens in this life experience. And there's so many instances of going through what I would call a dark night of the soul, of confronting the shadow aspect and having the shadow work is really ultimately about growing a part of yourself that you need in order to flourish in the world.
Yes.
And I would say, Dr. Cox, to be trans in this lifetime is a masterclass in self-love.
Yes.
Because in general, you are not going to get the validation from most anybody out there.
Right.
And honestly, we should be operating from a place of like, it all starts here. Most
Absolutely.
of them don't. So.
And we live in this day and age of where external validation is everything. You know, the social media explosion has really accentuated that in an unfortunate way, I think, particularly for our younger generations, because they're on social media and they're comparing themselves to images that are not even real. They're AI generated, much less, photoshopped. So, and there is the social media opens up this avenue or this venue for people to be hypercritical of someone in an anonymous way, so that they don't even have to reveal themselves. And yet it has such a negative impact on the person receiving that feedback.
It is incredible. And I don't think we can underscore enough the impact that bullying, and certainly you're talking about cyberbullying right now, which is very real. I was, bullied in quote real life a lot as a child.
I'm sure.
And I don't think I recognized for years, and really until quite recently, how much that impacted me. And I looked at certain ways I had been behaving as an adult, and that I was always a perfectionist. I was always staying busy, always seeking something to make life better. Those are all trauma responses.
Yes.
And so to really sit with the things that were sort of flung at me, which is a lot of insecurity, a lot of, again, knowledge deficit. And honestly, a lot of young kids just absorb what their parents say.
Right.
For me to sit with that and detach from it and say, okay, what is this trying to teach me? And then also to learn to give it back to where it came from.
Yes.
Was really empowering to say, I'm giving you back this wound. I'm not carrying this anymore. This came from you. This goes back to you. There is a lot of empowerment in these sort of rituals that we can do to take back and reclaim the parts of ourselves. And this is something that the trans journey taught me that I probably wouldn't have gotten other places.
Agreed. I think so many people, even those of us who are cis and hetero and, conform to all of the norms, have to battle those voices from the past. And I often find myself telling my patients that every time you allow this voice to cause you to feel bad, the voice of your father, your mother, your teacher, a coach, whomever it was, that was hypercritical of you or gave you a message that said you're not good enough. Every time you allow that, that message and that voice to come into your mind, it's as if you're bringing that person into the room with you right that moment and giving them the power to make you feel however you're feeling. And so, because that's in the past, you now have control over that. You can say, this doesn't belong to me. As you're saying, this doesn't belong to me.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that is you're letting them win over and over again, I think, is the bottom line. And at the end of the day, like, as adults, I think we all have to take responsibility for our trauma and our wounds. And it's not fair. And it really sucks. Adulting is no fun.
No.
And yet it is through this journey that there is this sweet victory of reclaiming those parts of ourselves that we've given away. And we leak our energy and our power all throughout our lives to these things when we could redirect that energy towards creating the life and the future that we desire.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's really, and I'm always struck in, as I watch my daughter blossoming and growing and going through the trials and tribulations that she's gone through, because this is a difficult journey. I am really struck by the courage that it takes to be authentic. And as you and I have discussed before, that applies to all of us, regardless of how we identify in terms of our gender, what our sexual orientation is, regardless of any of that. Being authentic, it takes a lot of courage, and it's a journey to figure out, who am I authentically? How do I peel back the layers of the onion to get to the core of me? And how do I identify what part of that core are false belief systems that were set up by, I believe Carolyn Mace wrote in her book, Anatomy of the Spirit, that we are born into a tribe. She calls it a tribe. So your family of origin, and then as that tribe expands beyond the family of origin, the messages that they give us are the belief systems that our character is built on, and yet they might be false.
Yeah. And we're not even...
Yeah, unpacking that is really important, and getting down to, okay, what's truth with a capital T versus what is the false belief system that I was given, and transforming it. We have to transform it, right? Yeah. So again, that transformation is so important. And the trans experience really embodies that.
Yeah. And to sum up everything you just said, I've said it before, I'll say it again. The journey to becoming our most authentic selves is a human journey, not a trans journey.
That's right.
And we certainly embody certain aspects of it in ways that are, that some people want to see as extreme. But it is all of our jobs to look at the things that we passively absorbed as children and question, are they working for me? Mm-hmm. And if not, how can I take what was given to me by my family lineage and adapt it to a new and changing world and expand on it? Because there is good in everything. And you just have to see, is it serving you or not? I would argue that the gender binary does a disservice to the majority of people.
I agree. Because we are all unique humans, and we all express a different degree, or are aligned with a different degree of gender in each one of us. I mean, I know plenty of women who seem hyper feminine. They're cis women, and they're all feminine. And there are some cis women who are much more masculine in their approach, to life. And I think, like, for myself, I'm a cis woman, but I have lived most of my life in a mostly a masculine way, in a masculine profession. Medicine is a masculine profession. I started out in a surgical field in OBGYN. And my approach to problem solving is pretty surgical. So actually, when I switched over to psychiatry, I had to learn a gentler, more feminine approach, because psychiatry is a more feminine, it is one of the more feminine disciplines in medicine.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was kind of a challenge for me, because I was a little too maybe matter of fact for most people.
But also, I might argue that you had to be that way to be a woman in medicine prior to entering psychiatry. And
yes.
and so, I mean, even I have to bring some masculine energy into my job to function in the world, because I'm taking on certain responsibility in the care of a patient that's under anesthesia. So we tend to think that the binary is the sort of natural order that has always been. And if we do just take a really quick peek back at history, we see that transgender, nonconforming, two-spirit, hijra, whatever, people have existed all throughout time. And that many cultures made a place that was sacred for them because of our unique perspective of having sort of this different lived experience. What happened is that historically, it was European settlers who colonized indigenous populations and really brought this strict gender binary as a sort of form of patriarchal reward system, where people at the top were rewarded for, the sort of cisgender heterosexual white men were given the most privilege, beneath them white women. And then, of course, brown people and LGBT people were sort of demonized, and this sort of second-class citizenship was set up and reinforced by a lot of, Abrahamic religions throughout the world. So what we think of as the natural order is actually just a historical construct that we've all just sort of bought into.
Right. I think we've discussed some of the history before on your podcast, Conscious Quest. The first recorded existence of trans people were the Gala priests in Sumeria, pre-Babylonia, very, very old, 9,000, 10,000 years old. And those are they were the priests of the temple of Inanna, and they were considered to be keepers of the sacred. But they were non-gendered. They adorned themselves as feminine, and but they were male at birth. So, and down through history, as you're saying, through all sorts of different cultures all over the world, there have been non-binary and transgender people. And here in the United States, or in the Americas, we should say, the indigenous people have recognized two-spirit people in their cultures. And again, always considered to be very special, to embody special sacred knowledge for the tribe. So they were treated as such, with reverence, as it should be. And here we are again.
What happened?
What happened? Well, they had to have somebody to blame for something, right?
Yeah. It's funny how every election cycle, Republican politicians seem to need someone to fill that role. And look, I guess I'm it this time.
Yeah, you're such a boogeyman, Sarah.
Very scary.
So scary. So scary.
Yeah.
What, we have I think the ACLU is tracking over 500 anti-trans bills throughout the United States in various states. And there have even been one or two here in California.
Yeah.
What do you foresee with this new administration coming in? What are your concerns, and what do you foresee?
I really want to sound a huge alarm for people out there, allies, even people who are not allies, about what is happening legally against trans people. Again, what happens to one population could conceivably happen to many populations. And what we're seeing is this sort of systematic dehumanization of the trans community. And when you dehumanize a group of people, all of a sudden you relegate them to a place of moral exclusion, which means if they are not human, you can steal away their rights. You can say whatever you will about them. You can do whatever you want about them. This sort of cycle is not new in history. It has happened before.
Right.
Almost 100 years ago, it happened in Nazi Germany. Trans and gender nonconforming people were some of the first people targeted. If you don't believe me, please, by all means, turn on Netflix and look up the documentary El Dorado, which goes into all of this. El Dorado was a pretty famous gay and trans nightclub in Berlin. And what was interesting about that time was how Berlin, in those years preceding the war, was one of the most liberal times in German history, bookended by this very quick, almost like lightning speed transition to hyperconservatism, I guess I would say. So the concern is the dehumanization, how the stories are told. With enough messaging, people just start to believe it. We're talking over $200 million that Republican politicians spent on anti-trans ad campaigns leading up to the 2024 election. Why, of a population that is 0.5 to 1% of the populace,
Tiny.
How are we responsible for everything that is a problem in America? I just want to point out again to everybody, these types of approaches are used over and over again. They just keep changing the target.
Right.
And if you don't think that they're coming for you next, I'd like you to wake up right now.
Right.
What we're seeing with the bathroom issue, and there is no data to prove that trans people, primarily trans women, are of any danger in the bathroom. In fact, studies show that we are far more at a risk of being sexually assaulted.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right. I was just, I pulled up before we came on an article that was published out of the Harvard School of Public Health. Wherein 3,700 U.S. teens ages 13 to 17 were surveyed and found that 36% of transgender or gender non-binary students with restricted bathroom or locker room access reported being sexually assaulted in the last 12 months prior to that survey. And that was in 2019. Now, the anti-trans rhetoric has already, it's only escalated since 2019, radically. And of all students surveyed, 1 out of every 4, or 25.9%, reported being a victim of sexual assault in the past year. Yeah. So yes, and there were no incidents of assault by a transgender woman in a woman's bathroom on a woman.
Can we just sit with that for 1 second?
Right.
The numbers don't lie. And the other piece I want to point out about another very hot button topic is the issue of sports. And there's all this rhetoric around people saying, keep biological men out of women's sports. And that's to refer to trans women.
Right.
Which is just, again, a dog whistle to strip us of our identities and just reduce us to people who have no claim to womanhood. What you see is that there are about 500,000 members of the National Collegiate Athletic Association, so 500,000 students in the country, part of this association. Of that number, about 40 are transgender.
Wow.
And yet we have this enormous push approach to protect women's sports and to make women safe. When we are talking of those 40, maybe 20 are trans women, 20 trans women are not destroying 500,000,
athletic careers.
Athletic careers. Correct.
Right. Right.
So when we look at the numbers, I mean, the lie speaks for itself.
I agree. And it is apparent that between the transgender community and the immigrant community, these have just become a way for the conservative politicians to stoke and foment fear and hatred.
Yeah.
Sarah, I know that you have worked in a hospital where gender affirming surgery has been one of the things that hospital provides, and happily. And I wonder if you could speak to all of this. Really, I'm just gonna call it propaganda about children receiving gender affirming surgery.
Yeah. So I think we need to really expand what gender affirming care means for kids. Why is it even a thing? I know a lot of people of polite constitution want to say, well, why don't we just wait till they're older? They can make choices for themselves. I will tell you, as someone who was aware of being trans at 5 years old, had terminology to describe who and what I was by the age of 10, to go through the wrong puberty is so psychologically damaging. And it created what I would call just the darkest period of my life of just complete clinical depression. And we look at kids under the age of 18 who are trans or are questioning, and the rates of suicidal ideation are extraordinarily high compared to the general population. It's a really delicate time. So what it means for gender affirming care for kids is really just changing hairstyles, maybe, or changing a name and pronouns or the way they dress. So where after some time of discussion and monitoring and engaging with that child, parents and doctors, then kids, as they approach puberty, they might start taking puberty blockers to delay puberty, safe and reversible treatment that also cisgender children use sometimes. So how is it making sense to provide for some kids but not others? And then kids, after some time of being on puberty blockers, may or may not be moved forward with gender affirming hormones. But in general, surgeries, especially genital, what we call bottom surgery, is not done until over the age of 18. I mean, I see people who come through the hospital and I see their age who are on the board for surgery that day. And I've never seen someone below the age of 18 coming in for bottom surgery. Now, may trans guys come in at like 16 or 17 for what we call top surgery or mastectomy? Yes, they may in some cases, but I will also point out that they've probably gone back and forth with a lot of screening. And keep in mind that cisgender boys that age and younger come in for treatment for things like gynecomastia, which is male breast growth in cisgender boys. So that's the thing.
I was just reading in the Journal of American Medical Association, there was a study, researchers found roughly 150 cases in which a minor received gender affirming surgery in 2019 again. But of those cases, of those 150, 146, or about 97%, were chest reduction surgeries performed on cisgender male youth because of a condition called gynecomastia, which is an abnormal growth of breast tissue on a male body. And so that was their gender affirming surgery. Right. These were not trans men.
Yeah. And so, how do we justify allowing treatment for one population and not the other? And it boils down to, why is the rest of the country, and in fact, the world, being invited to make valuation about my healthcare
Exactly.
who have nothing to do with me?
Mm-hmm.
And there is no data to prove that I'm harmful to society. And there is no data. We don't have all this strong data saying like that these kids who transitioned years ago
Mm-hmm.
are like expressing regret or changing their mind, because again, the process selects for itself. To go
Exactly.
this route and go against society and maybe your church and maybe what your parents want you to do, and make physical alterations to your body in order to step into alignment and authenticity with yourself, so you can
Right.
function through your interface of gender with the world. There is not this data showing that lots of people regret. We're talking maybe 1 or 2% may have some issues with their gender affirming care. So improve the process, not banning it, might be
Right.
the best answer. I just will point out one thing in general. I believe the regret rate for any type of surgery, we're talking knee replacements, whatever, is 14%.
So it's much lower for transgender people who have that gender affirming surgery. It's 1% or less. And I believe what was the percentage of transgender people who actually have the full gender affirming surgery?
Right. As far as genital surgery, only about a quarter of trans people have it.
Right. Right.
So this, we can't reduce this experience to a monolith, I guess is the point.
Right.
Of like, to be trans is to go through all these hormones and surgery. It may or may not. I mean, it's personal. It's up to different people. Mm-hmm. Some people start transitioning at some point, get off their hormones, have children. It happens. You know, they use their parts to have children. Mm-hmm. And it's not unheard of, or they'll bank their DNA or whatever. So this idea of like kids being mutilated, having surgery, being sterilized, it's very dehumanizing language.
Yes.
Around care, which for a tiny segment of the population is life-giving, right, and life-saving. Right. This enabled me to live and function in the world and be productive. Right. And for someone who has 3 degrees and has been practicing anesthesia for 16 years, I have a hard time believing that I'm crazy or that I'm the problem in America right now.
Yeah, that's pretty hard to believe, isn't it? So Sarah, what is your advice to the trans community who may be listening now? Moving forward as we move toward January and the inevitable inauguration and installation of the Trump administration in the United States, what would be your advice?
Yeah, thank you. I would say lean into each other. What we're facing is probably the largest existential threat we've ever seen to the trans community. It's well-funded, it's well-coordinated, and, you know, their PR is pretty effective, unfortunately. I will give them that. So community is always so important for regulating our nervous systems, for information sharing. I would recommend to all trans people to get all their identification in order, any name changes, gender markers completed while they still can. Right. Accessing gender affirming care and maybe stockpiling things while they still can. Yes. You know, having a passport and really coming up with plans of resistance. And even in the worst of times, like, people do band together and form resistances. While I don't want to see anything ever go backwards, I will say that in general, to be trans right now is some of the best times it's ever been. Because 30 years ago, I mean, we didn't have the level of quality of, you know, care and opportunities. And in fact, there were times in the last 5 years where I would be driving in Los Angeles and see billboards for Pose and see Black trans women on a billboard celebrated. And as a child, the only place I saw people like me was on the cover of the National Enquirer or the Maury Povich show.
Right.
Or who was the other guy?
Jerry Springer.
Jerry Springer. So, so we have come a long way. We're not insignificant. There's 1.6 million trans people in the US alone. And I think now is the time to really get involved with local government and show up. Democracy only works when we are practicing it collectively.
Yes, yes. It's been said that it is not a good idea to comply preemptively with fascism. And the best resistance is to be out there, to speak your voice, to network and to form community and to practice kindness everywhere. That really is a key for us to be kind to one another. That may be hard for us to do that with people that would actually take away the human rights of people that we love and ourselves. But it's important.
Yeah. So important.
Yeah. And Sarah, I want to learn a little bit more about your coaching practice because I'm very excited about that. I can see you pivoting a little bit. I don't know if you'll ever give up anesthesia, but it's exciting to me to know that you have a coaching practice. And how do you bring your own experiences into that?
Yeah, thank you so much. So I basically in the last couple of years worked a lot with coaches and hypnotists because I think for me, it really helped me move the needle in life and to really shift some of my subconscious programming, which was getting in the way of me getting the things I really wanted. As a result of that, I want to be able to help others as well. And so again, to get back to my philosophy, I did find that when I was in alignment with my values and authentic to myself, I was really able to weather the storms of whatever life threw at me and really shine and thrive. Yeah. And so this is the mindset that I want to help instill in others. And I think it comes from really personalized attention and really helping understand people's blind spots and where they're operating out of fear, because it's scary. It's so scary to step through the limiting beliefs that are holding us back. And yet I know what it's like to be on the other side of fear. Mm-hmm. And the possibilities that are out there. And I just want to be a possibility model for other people and help them find that within themselves.
Right, right. And that which we fear is really our greatest power. That's where our power lies, right?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Sarah, I can't wait to see how your career unfolds and where it all takes you. I know you have some big adventures coming up soon, and I'm really jealous. Just want you to know. I may have to follow you a little bit.
You will be welcomed, and I will pave the way. And
thank you.
We're in a changing world, and we're going to figure it all out, and we're going to take care of each other.
Yes, that is key. That is key. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you.
And I just can't wait, like I said, to see what happens. So you take very good care. And audience, I want to remind you again that I have these great producers that I couldn't do any of this without because I'm completely tech ignorant. And they have done so much. And they are Shana McCullough and Brian Ferguson with Procast Studio, and I am forever grateful to them. And as we head into this holiday season, everyone, appreciate your family. If your family doesn't appreciate you, then make family instead of settling for the one that you had, that you were born into, and just love one another as much as possible.
You can be a